In the early days of this war in Ukraine, Russian President Vladimir Putin held regular meetings with Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu and, of course, his Chief of General Staff, Valery Gerasimov. Now, these meetings were readily reported by the state media in Russia. There were also regular Defense Ministry briefings, very much in the media spotlight. It was clear that the defense institutions of Russia were in charge on the battlefield and they were leading the official narrative on the war. But as this special military operation has started suffering setbacks in the last few months, it is not so much the official state actors, but non-state actors who seem to be holding sway. Strongmen like businessman Yevgeny Prigozhin and Chechen leader Ramzan Kadyrov have come to the fore. Although neither of them holds an official position in the defense or security structure of the Russian state, they have played a significant role on the battlefield and also in shaping the narrative around the war. Now there is intense chatter among the Russian elites that Prigozhin and Kadyrov represent a taste of things to come. On Crux Decode, will the hardliners prevail more? Russia seems like it is losing this war. What are the chances that one of these non-state actors like Prigozhin, for example, would seek to replace Vladimir Putin as Russia's next leader? And how may this force the Russian power elites to respond? Will they rally around Putin or will they retract? Ramzan Kadyrov, who's been the head of the Chechen Republic since 2007, is the only regional leader in the Russian Federation who commands his own armed forces. His fighters have been participating in the conflicts in Georgia and Syria. In this current war in Ukraine, they have been deployed right from the start. Kadyrov, in fact, claimed that there were 12,000 Chechen troops who were sent to Ukraine back in February. Additional Chechen battalions were also organized both in June as well as in September of this year. While Kadyrov is extremely active on social media, he has become more vocal in the last few months, even as Ukraine has been launching a successful counter-offensive, both in the east as well as in the south of the country. Kadyrov was among the many high-profile voices in Russia who confronted directly the Russian armed forces for their retreat from Izium and Kupiansk, and later on, of course, from Kherson. He sharply criticized the military leadership. He in fact pointed a finger specifically at the commander of the Central Military District, Colonel General Alexander Lapin. General Lapin was removed from his post in late October. And Kadyrov is not the only one. Another critical voice has been that of Yevgeny Prigozhin, the founder and the head of the Wagner military group, which is a private military company that was involved in wars in Syria, Libya, the Central African Republic, and Mali. While Wagner mercenaries have been operating in eastern Ukraine since 2014, Prigozhin, in fact, stepped out of the shadows and assumed the leadership mantle of the Wagner group only in September of this year. First, there was a video that was leaked of how this former convict turned business mogul personally recruited Russian soldiers to fight for the Wagner military group in Ukraine. And then he revealed that he indeed owned the Wagner group, which in early November had opened its official headquarters in St. Petersburg. Now, these developments are significant in that they reveal the growing tensions in the leadership in Moscow. They also portend to what could be the future of intra-elite warfare. It is becoming apparent that to maintain some form of consensus amongst the ruling elite, the Kremlin has got to intensify pressure on those who are skeptical about Russia's chances of victory in this war. Now, this is strengthening the position of hardliners like Prigozhin and Kadyrov. These are actors who could also offer alternative solutions amid the failure of army commanders to deliver a decisive victory on the battlefield. The shift of power and influence away from the official security and defense institutions towards non-state actors might have significant consequences. These new dynamics may be driven by the personal ambitions of Kadyrov and Prigozhin. Back in September, the Chechen leader Kadyrov had lamented being the longest-serving head of the republic in Russia and hinted that he wanted to leave his post. Now, those remarks had fueled rumors that he's pursuing another state position, possibly at the federal level. Similarly, there is speculation that Yevgeny Prigozhin is preparing to create a new conservative movement promoting patriotic values, and he formally wants to enter Russian politics. While Kadyrov's chances of rising within the Russian state hierarchy might be limited because of his ethnic background, Prigozhin does not face such constraints. He could even aim for a presidential run in 2024. The potential for regime or state collapse is already being discussed by Russia's ruling elites. Some highlight the possibility of a governance meltdown in the midst of all of this military defeats. Others also point to the potential of regional separatism even as Moscow runs out of resources to subsidize the poorest parts of the country. Now, these early signs that Prigozhin wants to enter Russian politics and possibly even announce a presidential run in 2024 is making the Kremlin game out such a scenario. The Kremlin might empower him and other actors as a way to preserve intra-elite unity. The appointment of Prigozhin to an official position within the state structure, or even grooming him as Putin's successor, may be a way of warning the elites that if you ignore Putin, if you dump Putin, this is who could come if you fail to support the incumbent. It's not coincidental that Prigozhin, Kadyrov, and hardline nationalist politicians like Igor Girkin, or even ultra-nationalists like Alexander Dugin, have been attacking the Russian elites, accusing them of pursuing personal profit and comfort. War, according to them, exposes disloyalty and the rot within the ruling Russian elite. While at this moment, the elite consolidation around Putin does not seem to be threatened in any way, the retreat from Kherson, along with earlier military defeats, have sown doubts of Russia's chances of winning this war. As military defeat becomes more likely, the future of the country and its ruling elite grow that much more uncertain. Such a scenario could trigger a search for a replacement for Putin without destabilizing the country. That, of course, would be the biggest challenge for the Russian elites. Could that successor, could that challenger be someone like Prigozhin, who's a non-state actor up until now? Or will the Russian elite decide to fall back on one of the symbolic figures from the Russian state institutions, despite the seeming defeat on the battlefield? That is going to be the greatest challenge that they will face going through into 2023.